Municipalities and government departments are having to surrender hundreds of millions of rand to Treasury after failing to spend the funds. In the previous financial year alone, municipalities failed to spend close to 1 billion rand allocated for conditional grants. In April, Finance Minister eNCA called out underperforming municipalities, including some in the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, Northwest and the Western Cape. Opposition parties have raised concerns, saying there is a lack of administrative and organisational will to spend the allocated funds. Let's discuss this now with Dr. Mampho Modise, Deputy Director General for Public Finance at Treasury. Thank you so much, Dr. Modise, for speaking to us on SAT this evening. We appreciate your time. How are conditional grants distributed to municipalities by Treasury, and how are these allocations different from standard municipal budgets?
Good evening to you and the viewers at home. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to explain some of the budgetary issues with you. So firstly, there's two types of conditional grants. There's direct conditional grants that are allocated through the Division of Revenue Act, and there are indirect grants that are with the main departments, and those would be dispersed as and when the the municipalities adhere to the conditions. The direct conditional grants, those would be dispersed through what we call the Division of Revenue Act, and that will be the Act of Parliament.
So when and how are these conditional grants awarded to municipalities? What do they need to apply for them? Do they say, well, hang on, our budget isn't stretching far enough, there is a need for additional funding, and that's when a conditional grant is allocated to them, or how does it work?
The conditional grants are decided in advance. So basically, for money to be put on a conditional grant, there has to be a need and a purpose, and they are very specific to dealing with a problem. So for example, you have infrastructure conditional grants, and those grants will be mainly to deal with infrastructure or identified infrastructure problem in different municipalities and provinces. The grants are allocated over a certain period. So in the budget period, we have a 3-year budgeting cycle, and those conditional grants will be allocated over the 3 years to those municipalities or provinces that require those grants. So it is pre-allocated, and for municipalities to access or provinces to access the grants, they have to adhere to some of the conditions that would be in the Division of Revenue Act. And then after they adhere to those conditions, the funds will then be dispersed to them.
What's worrying is that you've said that there's a requirement. There must be a need for these conditional grants, and then they're allocated. Yet municipalities across the country are having to return these funds because they haven't spent them on the need that was there in the beginning, that necessitated these conditional grants. So what happens when municipalities don't spend this funding on the kind of infrastructure or other issues for which they have been allocated?
There's different processes that we follow at the Treasury to try and assist municipalities to spend these grants. And firstly, there's different reasons why the municipalities don't spend the conditional grants. It ranges from contract delays, planning, the implementation processes tend to take long. So what we tend to advise municipalities to do would be to apply for rollovers, especially for those that have contracted and they have invoices, but they didn't do the payment in time. There's a process of rollovers that is there. But we also look at a longer allocation period for these municipalities, such that, for example, you get a conditional grant that was estimated to last for a year or 3 years, but because of the delays, we extend the lifespan of a conditional grant until that problem has been resolved. One example would be the school infrastructure grant. That grant has been in place for several years beyond what we expected, because there's some delays that are resulting in the municipalities and provinces not finishing off the projects that are linked to that particular grant.
Does failure to use these grants and spend that money impact the next year's financial budget for a municipality, given that you've said there are some rollovers? Do they then get allocated less in other areas?
No, so the process of the conditional grant is clear. If you have to build 15 schools, you will have to build 15 schools. The allocation for the whole budget process is based, of course, on the resources that government has. So the reduction in some of this conditional grant is not mainly because of non-performance, but it would be because of the economic performance. But we don't penalize any municipalities or provinces for not spending and that impacting on their next year's budget.
What kind of checks and balances are there for Treasury to track down how these funds are being used, when they are used, and if the reasons for them not being spent within a certain period, whether those reasons are legitimate reasons?
There's different mechanisms that we use to do the checking. One, we do eNCA monitoring, where we look at the performance of the spending. We also report to Parliament on the spending patterns of departments and other spheres of government. We also have programs in place that would assist with the technical assistance if the municipalities or provinces or department need assistance. So it's an ongoing process, and it's for the whole year. We don't just allocate funds and leave the municipalities and departments to spend on their own. We do make follow-ups. We do look at the performance during the course of the year. Then we would propose whether funds must be reprioritized to other areas. In the budget, in the MTBPS, we also publish some revisions, and those revisions include some of the grants.
So, South African citizens, because we have such a backlog of service delivery and infrastructure projects, that people are almost impatient to get going. People want services to be improved. They want new infrastructure to be built. If their children don't have access to adequate schooling, they're desperate for those schools to be built and to be built on time. So while it's completely understandable for there to be delays in certain instances, should South Africans see the returning of unspent conditional grant funding as alarm bells that things are not going as they should be going? Or is this perfectly natural in any fiscal cycle?
Well, you wouldn't want to have delays in infrastructure projects because the more the delays, the costlier it is. So we do worry about lack of spending. But I think what is core would be how do we assist the municipalities or departments to spend better and to spend effectively. So if the return of the funds is because of efficiency improvement in the manner in which the spending has taken place, that's a good thing. But the return because there were delays, then that's not what we would want. So I think what is key to these organs of state is basically proper planning and planning in advance so that when they do get the funds, then they hit the ground running rather than getting the funds, then starting with the planning process. So we do worry, but we do work with departments and entities just to make sure that at least they plan in advance before they get allocated the funding.
Well, thank you so much for clarifying the situation for us and for speaking to us tonight. It really helps ordinary South Africans to really understand the process and why funds are being returned, and possibly even how they can get involved to raise their concerns when these funds are being returned and when projects are not being completed on time. That was Dr. Mampho Modise, Deputy Director General for Public Finance at Treasury. I do apologize. It seems that we've made a mistake. Dr. Mampho Modise from the Deputy Director General for Public Finance at Treasury.